I was like, dude, this whole economy is built on this assumption that bonds are safe, especially for retirees. And in inflationary times, they are not. They are anything but safe. In my decade of financial advice, I really did see that there is a ton of systemic weakness in current common practice financial advice. Current common practice financial advice is super weak when it comes to inflation. And I think the only reason that exists is because the US hasn't really seen inflation since modern financial advice has come along, modern portfolio theory. And here's the fundamentals behind it. Modern portfolio theory effectively says you want to be diversified, right? It says you want a mixture. And the way they diversify is they say you want a portion of your money in stocks and you want a portion of your money in bonds. And you're going to have a diversified stock portfolio. So you're going to be in like EFTs and mutual funds and crap, right? And then you're going to have a portion always in bonds. But when you're young, they're like, okay, feel free to go like 85% of your portfolio in stock and 15% of your portfolio in bonds. But there's always both. And the idea is if stocks go down, bonds go up. If people run away from the stock market, they usually invest in long-term safe stuff. Bonds, especially the US Treasury, is like the safest there is in modern portfolio theory. The US federal Treasury is looked as a no-risk asset class, which is insane to me, but that's the way it's looked at. And that's the way modern portfolio theory treats it. Now, here's the big problem. As we get older, every financial advisor in the world is going to advise you to push your holdings more toward bonds, okay? Because bonds are considered a safer asset class with lower risk. And so what they're going to do is as you age, they're going to go from 85% stocks to 65% stocks. And you're going to move to 35% bonds. And as you get older and hit retirement, the whole equation is going to flip. All right, they're going to put 40% of your money in stocks and 60% of your money in bonds. And as you draw down on your retirement, that whole equation might flip. You might end up at 15% stocks, 85% bonds, because bonds have a couple of things that are really great when it comes to financial planning. They pay a specific amount. They are not at all basically linked to the stock market. They do typically go up historically when stocks go down. There's a lot of stuff about bonds that is really good, and it served us really well to have this theory played out on the US global macro stage. Here's the problem. Bonds themselves are not that safe. They're perfectly safe in the economy we've lived in for the past 30, 40 years. But bonds themselves are super, super, super unsafe to one thing. I use an example in the book of a house, and the house is stable, and the bonds are like the foundation of the house, like the underpinnings of the house. Bonds are the things that should never be a problem, and the underpinnings of the house are safe unless you have termites, right? There's one thing that can compromise that one thing. The big cross beams on an old built house, those big fundamental pieces are safe unless you have termites which attack that specific thing. Inflation is termites, right? Because inflation directly attacks bonds in a way that's really, really scary. Because the way that bonds are constructed, it's like, hey, there's three pieces. There's the face value, there's the term, and there's the interest rate. The face value, the way that a bond works, if I was just looking at one bond, there's someone who issues this bond, they're borrowing money, Tesla, GE, the US federal government, whoever the crap, right? It's an IOU, a big honking IOU, right? I'm going to lend GE $100,000 for 10 years at 5.5%. GE guarantees me full faith and credit they will pay me this 5%. All right. I am a bondholder, which puts me in front of stockholders in liquidation. I am a bondholder, which puts me really high up as far as a creditor. I'm a secured creditor against GE's assets. I am 1,000 times more protected in a bankruptcy than a stockholder is, who will just get liquidated out, no questions asked. Bonds are really safe, right? But I'm locked in at 5.5%. That is the contract I've made with GE. I've lent them $100,000 at 5%. Here's the problem. So face value, term, interest. The face value is going to be 100K, no matter what. The term is going to be 10 years, no matter what. The interest is going to be 5.5%, no matter what. The problem is if there's inflation, because inflation is going to raise the prevailing interest rates in the market, just like we've seen. The way that you fight inflation is the Federal Reserve raises interest rates. As there's inflation in economies, interest rates always tick up. It's just the way that inflation kind of counters itself naturally, and the Federal Reserve counters it more directly. Like, hey, we got to take this medicine eventually. Let's start taking this medicine now, right? So inflation ticks up. So let's say that we have moderate inflation of 10%. I'm going to say 10%. And for the purposes of this math, let's just say that interest rates are right now at 5% flat, just so the math is more straightforward. What that means is there's a market out there that is still selling bonds. It's not like I bought my bond and then the market stopped selling bonds, right? I bought my bond and then the market kept on going. And then a year later, 2 years later, someone else bought a bond. And then a couple of years later, someone else bought a bond. If interest rates go to 10 with moderate inflation, what happens is the next person who buys their bond at $100,000 face value on a 10-year term gets 10% for their money. What that means is actually happening is if inflation has gone up by 5%, the value of the money has actually gone down by 5%. And so now my 5% coupon rate is effectively zero. Because I'm saying, hey, inflation's going up by 5%. I'm locked in at this 5% yield. The 5% I'm getting is only keeping up with inflation. The whole value of what I'm getting is now locked in. And I'm like, okay, I'm actually not earning anything on this bond because inflation's up at 10. Like inflation runs at 10, 15, 20. I'm losing the difference. If inflation's at 10, I'm losing 5%. If inflation's at 20, I'm losing 15% because my money's not spending as much as well as it used to. Things are 15%, 20% more expensive, but I'm only getting a 5% return on my money. And I am locked in for 10 years, right? So now I've locked my assets into a fixed position at a fixed interest rate, and inflation's just having its way with my whole portfolio. And so what people are forced to do is they're forced to just ride it out. They're forced to just lock in for 10 years, accept a crap interest rate, be unable to change anything because they've lent their money for a decade, or they can sell their bond on the secondary market. Now, if I hold the bond to maturity, if I hold it to 10 years, the contract says GE will give me $100,000 back. All right? But how is that $100,000 going to spend? Like if inflation has been 10% for 5 years, if I've seen 50% net inflation, then what's going to happen is they're going to give me $100,000 back, but 50% inflation means that it's going to be worth half as much. It's going to be like they gave me 50 grand back as far as net spendable income. The bigger problem than that is if I go and sell my bond on the secondary market, what I'm selling is a 10-year, 5%, $100,000 face value bond in a market where everyone else can go out today and get 10%. And so no one's going to pay me the same. I could just take my 100 grand and buy a 10% bond. Why would I ever buy a 5% bond, right? Unless there was some discount making up for the fact that I'm going to get a lower interest rate. And that discount is on the face value. So the secondary market says, hey, I'll buy your bond, but I'm going to pay you $80,000 on your bond because there's only 2 years left. They're going to say, hey, I'll pay you less because I'll get the 100 grand. And what I pick up on the discount is going to make up for the fact that the interest rate's crap. Or if there's like 9 years left, they might say, hey, I don't know where interest rates are going to go. Right now they're at 10, but they could go to 20. Like you're in a bad spot. I don't want to be in a bad spot. I'll pay you $40,000 for your $100,000 face value bond because I'm not only pricing in the fact that currently your interest rate is crap, I'm also pricing in the fact that there's a huge risk position in this bond that I've got to hold this thing for 9 years. And this interest rate could get worse. And so the secondary market isn't transacting bonds at face value. The secondary market has all these horrific discounts. So I'm stuck with one of these horrible options. I can either hold my shit bond, I'm sorry, for 10 years while getting eaten alive with inflation because the interest rate I'm getting doesn't keep up with inflation. Or I can sell my bond on the secondary market and take a hit on the face value and have a huge discount. I invested 100 grand, but I'm only going to get back 40 grand. I can lock in a 60% loss today. Those are my options in an inflationary time. Unfortunately, until this conversation, I would bet hard money that you've never considered this. And the reason for that is number one, our financial literacy in the US is not awesome. But number two, the entire modern portfolio theory of how money is managed relies on a mixture of stocks and bonds because brokers can receive payment on both stocks and bonds very easily. And they all invest this way. And they never discuss with anyone that bonds are specifically weak against inflation. And if inflation really gets away from us, a whole generation of retirees are going to realize way too late that bonds were the one of the least safe places they could possibly be in an inflationary economy. As a US economy, we're way too reliant on bonds, and we are pitched bonds as if they're guaranteed. Yes, the face value is guaranteed if you're willing to ride with a garbage interest rate for a decade. Yes, the face value is guaranteed and the interest rate is guaranteed, but there's no guarantee that that interest rate is going to be keeping up with cost of living, going to be keeping up with inflation. Bonds are actually a hyper dangerous position in inflationary times. And in 2022, 23, 24, we have seen for the first time since the 70s, so effectively in most people's adult lives, that inflation can even be a problem. Now, we have a solution for that at Bedrock. Single family residential 30-year fixed mortgage real estate is like the chef's kiss of inflation protection. You know who you want to be? You want to be the person who bought a house in 2000 for $300,000 and rented it in 2000 for $1,200 a month. Because inflation, now that house is worth $750,000. And with inflation, now that rent is $3,500. But on a 30-year fixed mortgage, I bought this house 25 years ago. And so my mortgage balance has gone like this. And I now owe on that $300,000 note, like I've got 6 years left. I owe like $24,000. All right. Someone else has paid my mortgage down. I'm $275,000, $6,000 richer. Right. And my mortgage payment, and this is the magic, is still the note payment on a $300,000 note. So it's still $1,500 a month or whatever that was. And so my mortgage payment has stayed the same while my rent has gone through the roof. My assets worth more, my assets paid off, my rent went up. It was all directly linked to inflation. The property went up because the value is worth less. People had to spend more dollars to actually get the asset. My rent went up because everyone's expenses went up. So I was able to raise my rent over time to just keep up with expenses. Everyone's income went up over time, adjusting to kind of keep up with inflation. My asset paid itself off, and I had no risk of my actual debt maintenance going up. So single family residential real estate on a 30-year fixed mortgage is actually an incredible inflation protection asset. Unfortunately, most people don't even understand that bonds are a problem. They're not looking at what's an inflation protection asset because they've never had this conversation. No one's having this conversation except me. Like literally, I try to have this conversation and people's eyes just go blank, because no one's having the conversation that we're really not prepared for inflation. The only reason I freaking know this is because I lived in Venezuela from 2001 through 2003. And I lived in a hyperinflation economy. And then I've watched all my friends in Venezuela get eaten freaking alive by inflation for 24 years. That's the only reason I'm even aware that there was a problem. And so for a decade in financial advice, I was like, dude, bonds kind of suck when it comes to inflation. And everyone else is like, well, yeah, but it's really not ever going to be inflationary. We're not worried about that. I was like, dude, this whole economy is built on this assumption that bonds are safe, especially for retirees. And in inflationary times, they are not. They are anything but safe. And I think we're hurtling towards some really catastrophic problems if we see inflation. And I think the US is actually currently seeing inflation in a really serious way. And I think as the dollar has weakened over 2024, 2025, all-time highs in gold, all-time highs in Bitcoin, all-time highs in foreign governments not carrying US dollars as their reserve currency denomination, we could be in for a catastrophic amount of inflation in the US. And we're just like, hey, we'll just keep working more, I guess. We'll get another job, I guess. We'll drop insurance, I guess. We'll just make do. But yeah, no one's talking about this that I have seen. And I follow like big economists. No one's talking about the fact that the US modern portfolio theory has some fundamental weaknesses when it comes to inflation that no one is addressing. Because the other option is like, okay, you're concerned about inflation, just buy gold. It's like, oh, okay, that's a retirement plan to live on. You know what's really going to be awesome and what you really need in your portfolio? $500,000 of gold, right? I pray that that's not the solution because you know what gold doesn't do? It doesn't pay you. You have to actually sell the gold itself to pay for one more month of living, where real estate pays rent every single month. And so rent goes up with inflation. Values of the asset goes up with inflation. It's just a much better asset. And the reason that we're uniquely positioned at Bedrock to do something is because multifamily doesn't have a 30-year fixed note. Multifamily has to refinance their notes every 7 years. They're commercial lending. There's almost no multifamily out there that has a 30-year fixed note. And because of that, if interest rates go up, multifamily goes from like, hey, our old note was a $25,000 a month payment at 3%, but we can't get a 3% note anymore because it doesn't exist. Our new note is 7%, and taking a 3% note to a 7%, our new payment is $57,000 a month. We were barely making ends meet at $23,000 a month. And so the bank is going to look at that underwriting and they're going to be like, well, at $57,000 a month, you don't actually have enough money to pay us and everything else. So what we need you to do is the dreaded cash in refinance. We need you to bring $14 million to the table so that your debt to equity is within lines, so that we'll even give you a new mortgage, or you have to sell this property right now. And everyone who's in the multifamily space is having that same problem, which is like we're all having to refinance our notes, all at 5.5, 6.5, 7.5%. Our pro formas were all built on a 3.5% interest rate because none of them thought 6 years ago that interest rates could double. And so now all of them are having to like scramble and sell other assets to get their mortgages in place for the next 7 years. Single family residential doesn't have to deal with that. It's a 30-year fixed note. It's like a magic thing that exists that shouldn't. But single family residential has a 30-year fixed mortgage. The bank takes the inflationary risks, which is insane. The fact that I can make an investment and have the bank take all inflationary risks and put 20% down and they'll take all the risks as far as inflation goes for 30 freaking years, that's madness. Like that is a magic trick.